How to know when to replace your rotors when doing brake pads. When replacing brake pads, you may ask, do I need to replace my rotors? In this video, I'm going to show you what you need to know to answer that question. And at the end of this video, I'm going to show you how to check for thickness variation to see if you have any problem with the rotor that, even though it looks fine and measures fine, it might still need to be replaced. Hi everyone, I'm Roger from Ask the Car Experts YouTube channel. I'm an ASC certified master mechanic. I'm going to provide you with lots of auto repair information, DIY videos, master mechanic tips and tricks, and I specialize in BMW. Let's go do some wrenching. There's many reasons why rotors may need to be replaced. First things off, visual inspection. Let's see what's going on. You want to check for any kind of grooving, and you want to feel to see how much of a lip you have in the top of the rotor on both sides. On the back side of this rotor, there is some grooving that's happening. It's probably not going to stay there. You can see the grooves right along here. And what causes the grooving? Well, the grooving is often caused actually from your brake pads themselves. If we take a look at this brake pad, you can see some deviations, especially right here. This is some kind of outside influence or a hard spot in the pad, and this actually can cause grooves in the rotor. While you're replacing your pads and you have this type of grooving and you have excessive grooving in your rotors, you can go ahead and just replace it. That would be the recommendation, because you don't want to put a new set of pads would have this nice smooth material here riding on what would be hills and valleys of your rotor, and that's just going to cause damage, noise, and it's not worth it. So replace those rotors if you run into that situation. Now I should mention, just having grooves on your rotors doesn't necessarily mean that it's defective. A hard spot can happen or contamination can cause that groove, but if you have plenty of pad material and you don't have any symptoms, the grooves in your rotors mean absolutely nothing. It has the same braking power. It doesn't matter unless you're going to be replacing these components. Alright, I'm going to show you how to do the measurements and how to use the brake caliper tool in just a second, but wouldn't you like to know what the measurement of your rotors are? What does that even mean? So your rotors have a minimum discard thickness. You have to find what that minimum discard thickness is to determine whether they need to be replaced. Let me show you where you can find that. Well, one place to find it is YouTube. Look it up. I have an E46 behind me over here. If I look up rotor specs on an E46, minimum rotor spec, it's going to come up. It's like one of the top things. It tells me what my min spec is. But there's another place you can check. Let me show you that. Most rotors have a minimum spec stamped somewhere on the rotor. If you take a piece of Scotch-Brite, or if you don't have Scotch-Brite, just use some light sandpaper and clean the hat area. And a lot of times you can just look for where the words are, and you can see how much material actually came off, actually quite a bit of brake dust. And if you clean that off, we should be able to read that. Minimum thickness for this rotor is 28.4. So what does that mean? So what does 28.4 mean? That means if this measures at 28.4 minimum thickness, I can actually put a full set of pad still on this rotor. Minimum thickness just means that it can go through a full set of pad. So 28.4, if it measures at 28.4, it's still good. A lot of people don't realize that. So you can go through a full set of pads at the minimum thickness. Now yes, it's going to be below the minimum thickness as it wears through, but it's made to go one full set of pad at minimum thickness. Now if you had 28.39, it can't make it through the life of a pad, so you should replace it. Let's measure these. Alright, so it's an opportunity to buy some tools. I'm going to show you what I use. So I have this one, and this is a larger one, and the reason why I have this one here is that you can actually measure rotors through the rims. So this is a Storm gauge, Storm 3M335 Storm wheels on rotor gauge. So I could actually slide this in between a rim and measure it, and that's why it has this long head here. The only thing you can't do with this though, and there is a problem, you can't measure around the hat of the rotor. So I can measure the outer edge, but I can't measure deep in here at the hat with that tool. So if you're not going to take your wheels off, it's a great tool. But since you're doing brakes, it's better to measure the outer and the inner, because you could be lower here than here. Anytime Tools has this great brake caliper gauge, and it's nice and long so I can get to the bottom of the hat, and I like that it has the 2 points. You can see here, it's not flat on each end. I like the pointy ends because you can get into the grooves and really determine whether you have to replace those brake rotors. Now obviously you can do this on the car, but I have this rotor off. You want to zero your gauge. You don't want to squeeze the gauge too. If I squeeze it, I can actually change the value. So when you're checking rotors, you're not actually going to be putting excessive force. You're just going to be gently closing it and stop and get your measurement. So you can see that I am at 1.89. There we go. So I am 0.13 off. I hit this little zero tab and it zeroes it out. Good to go. And then I like to check it a couple of times, slide it and slowly close and make sure I'm on zero. All right, so now we're gonna go over to the rotor and we're gonna measure in multiple spots, and I can rotate it and measure those spots too. So I'm just gonna gently place it and close it up. And I'm at 27.53 on the outer edge. My middle is 28.0, and my inner is actually 28.36. Just get one more angle here and slowly close this. You can see my lowest point is actually have a groove on top is 27.31. So these rotors are below spec and they are discard, but let me just go over a couple of things to check for in addition to the measurement, right? Say this was above, you still want to take into account how much corrosion, especially around this outer edges here. If you have heavy flaking on the outer edges of the rotor, then you might want to consider replacement also, because it's only going to get worse, especially here in New England when we have all of the salt and bad weather. Checking brake rotors on the car with the wheel removed. Make sure you have enough access to get to the hat. Start at the top, gently squeeze, do a reading, slide down midway, do a reading, slide down, do a little wiggle, don't put too much pressure, and do a reading. 22.04. Minimum thickness on a BMW E46 not M3 is 20.4. I measure 22. These rotors pass. My surface, while it is corroded, I don't have excessive corrosion. I could go ahead and reuse these rotors and just throw a set of pads on. Good to go, save some money. Rotors are not cheap, so finding a way to save some money if your rotors are good, definitely worth the time and worth the tool and the knowledge. So let me show you the bonus information. Let's do some thickness deviation measurements. So what is thickness deviation? That's a different thickness in your rotor in different spots, and that can cause a vibration when braking. And I mean, unfortunately, my wife has that in her car. It's relatively minor, so I'm not going to do anything about it until it's time to replace the brake pads. Unless it gets worse, then I have to replace the brake pads and the rotors. When I do her car and she needs brakes, I'll do the brake pads and the rotors because of that symptom. Now, if you have a brake vibration, vibrating only when braking, you still want to check and make sure you don't have any play, either in either location. That play is not real, that is just, it doesn't have a locator, but that's what you'd be looking for. You can hear that, right? So if that was in my wheel bearing or in a control arm or a thrust arm, that could be the cause of my brake vibration and not the rotors themselves. So let's do some thickness deviation tests. Bonus material coming up. Tip number 1. Use a Sharpie and write on your rotors. Who cares? It's going to self-clean anyways, or you can wipe it off with brake clean. So, just to my test, I love subscribers. Yes, I do. All right, thickness deviation bonus steps. I got to make this rotor into a pie. So, you want about 10 sections. So, we're going to go ahead and just make some lines in this, and you know what? I don't know how many lines I'm going to end up making. Sharpie's dying because it's actually a dry erase. So there we go. So now I have pieces of a pie, which is my rotor. I'm going to check the center of each pie. I'm going to measure those marks, 2.03, and write it in, 22.03, and turn and measure. 22.01. 22.01. I need a new Sharpie. All right, everyone, I found a Sharpie. So here's my pie pieces. And I got 22.02, 22.01, 22.01, 22.03, 22.03. This was 22.03. Go all the way around. So now you want to find your highest versus your lowest. And the spec is 0.03 millimeters. All right, so that's my highest is 0.3, my lowest, all right, 0.03, 0.01. My difference is 0.02. These rotors pass. 0.03 deviation is not much. So you might find that you have 0.05, 0.07. If you're not getting a brake vibration, it would be up to you to decide whether to put the rotors on. If you're not getting a brake vibration, it would be your choice whether to replace the rotors or not. But that is the spec, so if you do deviate more than 0.03, you should replace your rotors, or you would have to have them machined, which most people can't do at home. However, some repair shops will actually turn the rotors for you off the car. Now, BMW has an on-car brake lathe, which actually makes up for some deviations in the hub, and it's a more true 0 point to the car. So it is actually a very, very good quality cut. But if you want to cut your rotors, check out your local repair shops, see if they have a brake lathe, and you can remove the rotors, give it to them. You know, I don't know what they would charge you. If you find out, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And you could have them turned, as long as they're still above spec, above that minimum spec, you could then reuse them and save some money. If you found this video helpful, please make sure to like and subscribe. Please share my video on social media. It'd be greatly appreciated. Do you have a story about a brake job going bad? I'd love to hear your stories. Please send me a comment. Love to hear from you. More great use for brake rotors. They make great dumbbells. I'm going to put a link in the description box for this Anytime Tool brake caliper gauge that I like to use. Not expensive at all. Does a great job. Using the link helps me and my family out and helps support this channel. You guys are awesome. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like. And until next time, keep on wrenching.